Aloha, my name is Julie Mitchell, and I am the Executive Director here at Ikahi Mediation Center. We are the hosts of this Finding Solutions Growing Peace Brown Bag Lunch series, which happens on third Thursdays each month. Ikahi is a nonprofit community mediation center. We're one of 5 in the state. We were founded in 1983, so are celebrating our 40th birthday today as an organization. Not today, this year, rather. And we started out as a program of the Island of Hawaii YMCA, and we became our own independent nonprofit back in 2006. Our mission is to empower people to come together, to talk and to listen, to explore options and to find their own best solutions. And to achieve this mission, we offer mediation, facilitation, and training like this Brown Bag Talk that strengthens the ability of diverse individuals and groups to resolve interpersonal conflicts and community issues. For our next Brown Bag speaker, we are going to be having Sandra Delatour. She will be speaking on the topic, The Ladder of Assumptions, a tool for self-reflection and understanding, based on the book by Jack Hamilton and Elizabeth Seaman. That will be on August 16th. I will put that information in the chat box if you care to click in on it and register right now for our next talk. As I mentioned, every third Thursday at 12 noon on Zoom, Hawaii Standard Time, and just register each time to get the Zoom link. At the end of our talk today, we will ask you to fill out a short online survey, which helps with our grant funding for this free series. When I put the survey link in the chat, you just have to click in on it, and there's a few short questions for you to answer. I will also send out an email later with the video link, a handout that Paul will be referring to, and the evaluation link. We've heard some people had problems clicking in on Zoom, so we added it to our email as well. Now I am proud to introduce today's topic, called From Defensive to Disarming, How to Take the War Out of Words, which will be presented by Paul Hebert, who has been a handyman, a youth minister in the Catholic Church, a father of 2, an engineer for Digital Equipment Corporation for over 20 years, a motorcycle safety instructor, and a mediator and mediation trainer for the last 12 years. He is now retired and a singer, songwriter, definitely a Renaissance man. What else does his bio say? An expressive introvert, according to the Myers-Briggs type instrument. Paul is interested in transformative conversations, whether they happen in mediation or not. So here we are today, hopefully having a transformative conversation with Paul. Please take it away.
Thank you, Julie. That's a better introduction than I could have written for myself. So I am very grateful to be invited to present here. And I am especially liking the feeling of the hosting by Ikahi, which I learned meant a feeling of unity, among other things. And that feeling of unity is very much the goal for me all the time. So when I get to present something that I think is going to support a feeling of unity, that just rocks my boat. So thank you. I would like to start out here, and I'm going to be asking periodically for some feedback on things. And I have right here at the start an opportunity to do that. So what I'm going to suggest is that we go to gallery view for a second, so that you don't have to see me that much for this. I'd like you to be able to see everybody's screen if you could. And in gallery view, and there's a few pages worth, pick a page, any page, it's going to work for you. I'm going to just say a few phrases, and I'm asking you to use one of the reactions if you think that phrase describes the society we live in now. All right, so everybody ready on your reaction button? And you could just raise hand and lower it, but the little reactions will go away. A heart is always good feeling. First one, Winner take all. You better keep up. Rugged individuals wanted. All for one and one for all. Race to the top. Or it's a rat race. Okay, people are getting this reaction thing going now. Just do your best. There are winners and then there are losers. Oh, everything's fine. Boys will be boys. Know your place and stay in it. Remember, we're listening for, do you think that's the way things are? Divide and conquer. Everyone is precious. If you're not growing, you're dying. Every man for himself. Can I help? All right. So thank you. I think I saw an awful lot of flashing going on the screen where I was looking. I'm going to go back now to the speaker view. That's the world that we live in, that I grew up in and Sharon Ellison grew up in. And if you are fortunate enough to pick up her book, and let me pop that up here. So that is the title, Taking the War Out of Our Words, Powerful Non-Defensive Communication. If you're lucky enough to pick that book up and begin reading, she starts out by talking about how perplexed she was as a child at many of the interactions she witnessed. She would see things that just did not make sense among family or community members, people who you think should be reacting or interacting in a more positive way. And that was like a prick to her soul, I think, in some way. That's what I took away from it, that was persistent. And so she kept her attention on that for years. And this book was a result of that. One of the things that she noticed, and certainly most of you, I think, have noticed, is we grow up in a world that is very competitive. The concept of winning is very, very important. Now, I'm just thinking back over what I wanted to say before I got really deep into this. One of the things that Sharon Ellison's book is describing is this deep defensiveness that is behind a lot of the ways we interact. And it struck me, we're all animals at the bottom level, right? We all have, by a gift of nature, an inclination to be careful of ourselves, to be self-protective. And so whenever we're in a new situation, we are keenly attentive to, what's the order of things. In our society, there's a definite stratification. Who's the top dog in this room? Who's got, maybe the strings to help or hurt me? Things like that come to our attention as a matter of habit because we grew up in this world. This world is not the natural world that our natural defense triggers was trying to respond to. Nothing's trying to eat me, for the most part. I suppose there in Hawaii, occasionally there will be a shark, but the bottom line is the world we now live in is not the one that nature provided for in this protective instinct. It's one that we made up entirely ourselves, from the buildings that we're living in to the job and political and social environments that we're in. Everything we designed and was handed down to us for the most part, and we learn how to live and cope within it. Right from the moment that we're young, in the home, we're preparing our children to go out into the world. I know I was prepared. I want to share a little story for you about when I was young. I was a teenager, just beginning teenager. And one of the things that I knew from my experience at home was that cleverness was rewarded. And as it happened, I was one of 6 kids, and I maybe had an extra dose of cleverness, at least that's what I thought. So I figured out a way to tease my younger sister, who was every bit as trim and skinny as me, but I named her, or I gave her the nickname, Ot Bob Wiscott. And that would usually just cause people to say, what's that gibberish? But I would be happy to explain to anyone that wanted to hear. What that stands for is 1 10-ton bag of blubber with smelly kelp on top. And yeah, I have shared that a lot of times, and usually people chuckle. My dad did. But it occurs to me now, all these years later, that my younger sister maybe wasn't having such a good time with that. Actually, I'm quite confident that she was feeling very defensive in that moment. And she was learning there in the safest space we usually have, our home, that even people who are supposed to love you, they can hurt you with their words. Now, it wasn't my intention to hurt her. It was my intention to get attention for being clever. And the side effects for her were the same. So this was something that I learned back then. And people laugh at it now because we all grew up in the same world. This world is a world which expects us to be performance oriented. And by the way, this little saying here is just one I love to have around me. The universe is full of magical things, patiently waiting for our wits to evolve or to sharpen. I think that's what you're all here for, is evolution and sharpening. I love being able to speak with a group that's attracted to a topic like making peace in the world. So you're likely to be my people anyway, right? But going back to this way that we're socialized, my sister learned that hard lesson that way. And it could be, I could claim that I was only trying to toughen her up for the real world. That's not what I was doing. I could even claim, someone else suggested to me, I could say, well, that was just my love language for her at the time. And I suppose at some psychological level it was. But from within my psyche, what I was aware of, I just loved the attention and I was getting more of it. Now that seems innocuous enough, and we all get that stuff growing up, but it keeps coming. It keeps coming. When you go to school, there are bullies. When you go to school, there's the, king and queen of the class, and then there's, the people who are kind of weird out there, and then there's this lots of space in the middle where you try to hit a safe spot and find your spot, and then maybe a little bit climb as the opportunity and your talents show for it, right? And eventually we end up with the world we're in, where you seek to understand where you are in the stratification. You are careful not to step out in front of a moving train, right? Which is to say, and to gather the interest of somebody who is very powerful. And you just hang back a little. I think the effect of that, besides affecting our language, which is what Sharon focused on, is we all tend to get a little smaller, much smaller than we need to be. The world needs us all the way we are. All the wrinkles and flaws and barnacles that come with us. Those are all a piece of the gift that we get to bring. And if we shrink, if we get smaller because of our coping mechanisms for living in this structured world, then that's a loss for all of us. So the bottom line here again is everyone seems to be out to win, and everyone seems keenly aware that in order for me to win, some other people got to come in behind me or dead last. And therefore I play it safe, and that's a problem. Now, Sharon noticed this too, and she studied it. And Ms. Ellison came to describe it in terms of defensiveness. So the first part of her book, after she explains how it caught her interest, is all focused on how we use a defensive posture to meet the challenges of being threatened here in this made-up world. And by the way, if you get tired of me saying made up world, I'm going to say that's too bad, because I want us to be keenly aware that it's made up and that we have choices about amending it. I have a book that I love. I've read it a dozen times or more. It was called Illusions by Richard Bach. And in that book, he talks about how we all live in our own little world. You know, my concerns are not the same as the people who are running for president. They are not the same as doctors in the operating room right now. They are not the same as my stockbrokers. All of these people live in very different worlds. I live in a world that is contained between here and here, and I have a lot of power to shape it. And I believe most of the people here would understand that. So did Sharon. And she chose language as a place to focus on that. Now, when you think about the threats that might come up, like my sisters responding to my Aunt Bob with Scott, what are some of the possible defenses that she could come up with? Well, she could try to shrink away, become invisible, withdraw as much as possible from the situation. As a matter of fact, she did that several times. She headed right out of the room when that sort of thing was going on. She could decide after she slipped out of the room that she was going to get even somehow. She could stand in the room and fight with me. She could stand right up and go like, "You jerk," or some other accurate assessment. She could simply defend herself. "I'm skinny. I'm not fat. That's nonsense." Describe herself in this way. She could go on the attack and talk about some quality that she sees in me that really ought to be known by everyone. Okay, those responses kind of level out into three categories: withdrawing and attacking, and what's the third one, Paul? This is the sort of the thing that you memorize, and then in the moment it gets away from you. So withdrawing and attacking and surrendering. Now, surrendering is kind of like go in the other room and lick your wounds, because by golly, it's true. I am a bag of blubber. I feel like a bag of blubber. Oh my goodness. That's something that happens too. And again, at the beginning, I was describing how for me, it was just fun and games. I was playing the clever boy game. My sister might well have been experiencing a, oh my God, everything he says, and more than that, a kind of self-doubt, the beginnings of that. Now that, again, is all in the microcosm of our home. Stretch it out into the real world, and everybody has learned all these same things at home, and they've learned some new tricks in school. And then when you graduate to college and you graduate to the business world, you learn even more tricks. Go to the movies or watch TV, you can learn some more tricks. And you get to see over and over again in our world that there are winners and losers. There's sometimes the bad guys who, we're upset about, and the good guys chasing them down. Have any of you noticed the bad guys always seem to be having fun, even if they get caught in the end? This is the world in which we are moving all the time. And so our defenses, our natural defenses, are deeply honed. And Sharon noticed that our responses are also kind of automatic. So depending on what my personal qualities are, am I an aggressive or a passive sort of a person? Am I feeling quick and sharp, or am I having lots of self-doubts? All of those things are going to steer me towards the scripts that work for me. And as a good animal, I'm going to apply the defenses that work. And I'm going to attack when I feel like that's the defense that works. So what to do? Well, the first thing is to notice. And noticing what's going on with your with this defensive structure, and especially with the feeling that you're under attack or potentially under attack all the time, is like, what's happening with language? So she decided that's an excellent entry point to try and address this problem. And she describes 3 different kinds of expression that we can abuse and routinely do abuse, or we can use really effectively. And what I noticed as I was studying this to prepare and present it to you is that over and over and over again, what it comes down to is when you're using the language well, you are describing the world from your perspective. You're saying you're owning it, it's mine, and you are not trying to control anyone out there. You are sharing who you are. That is a premier and excellent use of language. Sharing information, also good for people to use however they will. So the 3 kinds of expression that Sharon mentioned are, and there are abuses associated with them. Let me see if I can find this. Here it is. They are statements, questions, and predictions. We'll start with questions because questions, to my mind, are probably the most frequently and desperately abused. A question, the good use for it, is simply to say, I need to know something. There's some information I lack that would be helpful to me, and I think you might know it. Would you share that with me? That is a great use of the question. Notice right off the start, it's a little vulnerable. In that question, I am revealing that I don't know something. It might be something everyone else in the room knows. Sometimes, in fact, asking that kind of question is a very daring thing to do. But questions are used in so many other creative ways. And one way to get at all these creative things that questions are used for is to think about the synonyms for asking a question. Interrogate, inquire, examine, test. There's a ton of these words, and all of these media pieces that we see, all of the classroom experiences that we have, they all have these questions being used to evaluate us or sometimes to position us. So what are some of these uses of questions? Well, one of them is simply what I just said, for me to sound smart. I ask a really brilliant question. And my reason for asking it is not so much that I need or want an answer, as I want everyone to know I thought of that. Then there is a question that is asked to reveal that someone else does not know. Sometimes that question is a threat. Sometimes that question is a signal that I know a secret that you have, and you should be worried about me sharing it. Sometimes a question is asked to sort out where people are in the pecking order. Well, how much do you make? Or what's your job title? Things like that may seem on the face of it to be genuinely interested and curious. But in this environment, when I get a question like that, there's at least one part of my brain that is attentive to the possibility it's not altogether a nice use of the question. So question abuse, especially in the mediation field, we have to be careful of it. I know in my mediation training, one of the things that, and I'm sure all of you got as well, is that you need to be careful not to be proposing solutions. And one of the ways I have over and over again as a mediation trainer experienced questions being used is to test a theory. Could it be that this? And that's not actually asking a question of the other person. That's pushing a theory out there in a helpful way, we're going to say, so that they can pick up on it and go like, oh my God, that's right. I did that. But 9 times out of 10, that's not the answer, the response you're going to get from them. So a question, however well-intentioned, that is reaching over there and pushing information, as opposed to reaching out and asking for information, is not the right use of the question. And Sharon would argue that the more we can discipline ourselves only to use questions, to ask for information that we personally desire or need, then we will ask a whole lot less questions. Really? Oh, really? Are you sure? All right, so you follow me on that. So the very first kind of statement that is abused in this way is question. And it takes a lot of discipline to weed those other questions out. And there are some, like I said, that live at the edges. There may be some genuine interest. It may be the way you normally chat someone up at a, an office event or something like that. But it's also seeking, leveling information, and maybe promoting some things that add to the stratification of our world instead of leveling it out. So that's questions. Any questions about questions? Be careful with this. I'm looking at the chat. So Sharon spends a lot of time on this in her book. And if you were fortunate enough at some point to take a course from her, you get to practice it in excruciating detail. It's amazing how difficult it can be to ask a really good question. A good question is also, by the way, curious, deeply curious, and attentive to the other person. So the more that your questions are reaching out for connection, in addition to information, I think the better they get. Next is statements. What can go wrong with a statement? I'm just telling you the way I see things. I believe this because I see that. So I know that is true. Oops. That last little bit had me falling off the edge of what makes a good statement. As soon as I begin to claim authority for the thing I'm saying, then I am pushing it out there. And for the most part, especially people who think they might rank a little bit underneath me, and I am, after all, the speaker here today, those people might be reticent to challenge something that I propose as a fact. So I take advantage of that. And that is an abuse of my statement. If I am making statements in order to claim that it is the truth with a capital T, that's even worse. Okay, so there's a certain push to that. And when I stop and think about most of the communication that I see when I'm on the internet, and forgive me, I'm going to get political for a second, but every time I see any kind of political advertisement or any request for money from one politician or the other, I look at the statements that accompany it, and I got to scratch my head. What I am noticing about them is that those statements feel like a hook with a worm on it to me. They're like, I'll bet you agree with this. Da-da-da-da-da-da. If you do, donate here. Okay, or I'll bet you're angry about that. Da-da-da-da-da. If you are, donate here. We're inundated with that on that side of the conversation. When you're at work, let's say you're in a meeting and there are multiple solutions to a problem that are being considered. Some people have, as a personal gift, a certain forcefulness of expression in a room, a certain power of being that's there. And they may well use that to back their idea up. Now, that's a very understandable use, but Sharon Ellison, I think, and me for sure, would say that's an abuse of your position and authority. If you've got that authority, and this meeting is about ideas that might be solutions, let's have all the ideas out there. Let the idea stand on its own. that is just one example there. I was in high technology for 20 years. And in those 20 years, I can't tell you how many meetings where ideas were being sought, but a competition was being experienced. And the competition wasn't about the ideas, it was about who got selected. And you know, it is so much damaging to that organization, as well as to the people who want to contribute, who start to notice how contributions get measured. So statements get abused all the time. Anytime that my statements are specifically aimed at persuasion, I'm trying to affect you. I'm trying to shape your thinking. Some might argue I'm doing that now. What I really want to do, though, is share this observation and information that meant so much to me. As I read Sharon's work, and I did take the course, I was struck by all these ways that these things are abused. And I kept catching myself time and again afterwards doing that. Why? Because I grew up in the same world as everyone around me. How do I change that? First, in my own world. I change how I ask my questions and for what reason I ask them. I put away the use of questions for those other things. And when I am presenting a statement, I'm careful to own it. This is how I see it. I think this, and I can explain why I think that. And I can understand how you might think something different. And sometimes I can't understand how you might think something different. But all the time, I can be careful about expressing myself with a statement. So now we have questions and statements. The next bit here is the prediction. Now, we all rely on predictions. You in Hawaii, probably more than most of us. I had just heard about the storm that you had. And we were talking, Julie and I, before things started. And she mentioned how on the islands, you get lots of warnings. And not everything hits you because you're a reasonably small target. But there's an awful lot of weather that comes by. And because you're islands, your predictors spend extra attention to make sure you've got information to act upon in your own self-interest. That's a perfectly good way to use a prediction. I'm providing observations based on my expertise that may help you plan your day. Thank you, the weatherman, or the weather app, you know, however you get it these days. Similarly, we rely on, you know, firemen and police and you know, all other kinds of emergency crews, lifeguards and things, to be able to predict trouble a little bit before it happens so that they can be there and at the ready for it. So that's not what I'm talking about. So what is the kind of prediction that can be abused? The prediction that can be abused is the one that is essentially a threat, right? So I'm going to tell on you. That was one that from my early upbringing, I heard that a lot, right? You know, so that's a bit of a threat. Someone is trying to shape my behavior with a prediction. And I know how that works, you know, so I also used it now and then. However, as we get older, we get a lot more sophisticated with those kind of predictions. And we do try. So if you're in a court mediation, you're actually counting on your lawyer to say, well, if you try this, then this might happen. You're counting on their expertise for that kind of prediction. But it's supplying information for a calculus about what's the most effective move. How can I win? Coming back around to where I was at the beginning, how can I win? Winning is the top objective here. When I'm in a conversation and I'm making predictions, a lot of times I am making them to shape your behavior in this conflict or in this dispute about who's going to pay what. All right. And this kind of prediction is, in Sharon's opinion, and I agree with her, an abuse of language. Again, we are trying to control someone else. When I am sitting here trying to control someone else, I am, and using my language, which is the primary tool for that anymore. We don't usually wrap a rope around our children's hands and tie them, although I have seen these leashes lately. But we don't usually do that. We try to control with words. And so using predictions to control that way is that same kind of abuse. I am reaching out, trying to run your life. Instead of using the prediction and going back to the purest case to share with you what I might do under certain circumstances so that I will be very predictable to you. Now think of the role of parent. I was fortunate enough to have that role for, well, ever so far. It's been over 40 years I've been a parent. Early on, I was attentive but not talented. And so one of the things I did was abuse everything. Statements, questions. Have you done your homework? That wasn't actually a curiosity. That was a way of saying, get in there and do your homework. Or you don't want me to ask to see it, now do you? So all of these things I use as a parent. Well, I'm going to share something from when my son was a preteen. He was in middle school. And he got in trouble. He and a friend got tempted to go onto a construction site when there was nobody there and see if they could steal a radio that was sitting there. They got caught. And the police brought him home and told us what happened. And he got a good talking to, and he got grounded, and that'll show him. Lesson learned, right? And then a month later, I got a call from the school. Oh, and I'll tell you one other thing that was going on. He was watching TV way too much. We had given him his own little TV so that he could watch the shows that he wanted, but he was just spending so much time on it that clever engineer dad actually went out and bought a locking switch and attached it to his TV so that I could turn the thing to enable it to be used or not. So these were the sorts of tactics I was using to try and responsibly shape my young man. But we got a call from the police this time, again, telling us that we could come and get our son. But we would have to do that to get him, that he was expelled from school for bringing a hunting knife to school. And so he had used my credit card to go online and order this thing and intercept it before we noticed that any package arrived. And then he had it in his backpack, took it to school, my preteen son, plain clever boy, really good at it. And he was showing it to some of his friends when other people saw it, made them nervous, and they told. And the next thing you know, the police have him. So we had to go and collect him from the police department. And the officer took me aside and said, this is the second time in a very short while that we have had to get involved with your son. This is Palo Alto, California, right? If it happens again, he will not be coming home. He will be going to juvenile hall. You need to know this. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Just remembering it hits me like a ton of bricks. And I was scared to death. I realized what I should have realized quite some time ago. I had no control over my son. But luckily, I realized something else. It wasn't a good idea to try and be in control of him. What was a good idea was to help him be in control of him. And so when we got him home, I explained to him how scared we were and why we were afraid. And I said, from now on, things are going to be different here. You bring home good grades, you're not going to get some special reward or pat in the back. You bring home bad grades, you're not going to get a punishment. You get in trouble, we will do everything we can to help you, but whatever the consequences of the trouble are, those are yours. But I want you to understand, and I hope you're getting it, that the trouble you got in today deeply troubles me. So it isn't hurting just you, it hurts other people. And so that's how we're going to run things going forward. All right. And turn the key on to the television. All of those controls I dropped. Now, I might have asked all of you, what would you do? And I did actually ask some of the people I worked with, and almost nobody came up with my solution. But I do think that Sharon Ellison would have liked it. I made myself very predictable to my son. I told him what was true for me. I didn't describe him that he was broken or bad or dangerous or any of those things. That was none of that was coming out of me. It was in there, but none of it was coming out. And anything that I asked him was out of genuine curiosity. I can share that he wasn't feeling very sharing in the moment. So this is where we come back to the title of our book, Powerful Non-Defensive Communication. And it's focused essentially, at least my understanding, is that you are sharing the gift of what you perceive using language. You are asking for help and participation using language. Those are great uses for language. They form community. They bring us closer. They level things up. They are an antidote for almost all of the structural ills that I described at the beginning. I think those are really wonderful. And I can tell you they work. My son is over 40, and I have been busting out proud of him since just about 3 months after that encounter. It was amazingly effective. I highly recommend the power behind this. And most of us don't think of ourselves, I think, generally as powerful, unless we have lots of letters after our name or lots of dollars in our pocket or whatever those measurements, those metrics are for success that we are showered with from our entry point to now. But just the simple fact of who we are, that we have the eyes and the heart that we have, is just amazing. And if we can share that effectively, the power behind that, I believe, is largely untested. And I would like to invite us all to test the heck out of it. Okay, so that is essentially what I brought to share today. I hope there's some nuggets in there for you. Again, I deeply recommend Sharon Ellison's book, and I thank her for the way her ideas have shaped my life as a mediator and as a parent. And I have provided to Julie a set of other references of things that I think relate to what I shared today that you may just find interesting. And thank you very much. I think now I'd like to open it up for observations or questions that any of you might have to share.
You can write in the chat box. You can do the raise hand feature like this. You can unmute yourself. We'd love to have a conversation. I know Paul is much more of a conversationalist than a lecturer. And so this format is a little different than he's used to. So if you have some ways that you'd love to engage him or delve more deeply into, we'd love to have you talk with us and open the discussion up. Who would like to go first? Kathy.
Hi, aloha, Kathy McPherson. I've heard of nonviolent communication. Is this connected to that movement, or is it something different?
Thank you. Yeah, NVC, or nonviolent communication, that's Mr. Marshall's work at the bottom of that. That's also a very wonderful approach to how we share our experience. But it's quite different than powerful non-defensive communication. I would say those are two trains taking parallel paths to a similar destination. In NVC, one of the big holes that they're trying to fill is not the way we are trained to be more aggressive or defensive or protective with our language. They are trying to fill holes in that we don't learn to express our feelings, that we don't learn to how to share those things and our opinions. So the NVC is about being able to share without, it's funny when as I think about it, as I'm talking about this, trying to remember back to what I read in the NVC stuff, they have, right, the giraffe and the, what is it, the wolf or the coyote?
Jackal.
There's jackal. Yeah, there's an aggressive and a peaceful, sort of natural, loving, non-aggressive kind of a choice you can make about how to express yourself. But then having the vocabulary for feelings and beliefs is one of the big holes they're trying to fill. So Sharon's work is quite different.
In the chat, but it was private to me rather than to the group. One person is asking, could you give some examples of how to use any of those three in the mediation session? In the mediation setting.
Well, sure. So to begin with, when we're talking about, like, you're opening things up, you're trying to set the framework, you're sharing information. And a lot of times I remember people struggling with this notion of it's private, nothing that you say in mediation can be shared outside of mediation, especially not in a courtroom. It can't be used as evidence against you, right? Because people are concerned about sharing, and you're trying to remove this barrier to sharing by describing that it can't be used in a court. Well, when I stop and I think about that from a defensive language, and just defensiveness position, the moment I say can't be used against you, I've kind of identified this whole danger zone. And so one way to try and shift the language would be to think of a different way to express, using statements, and maybe a prediction or two. Like I could say, I will assure you that I will not repeat anything that you tell me to anyone outside this conversation, unless you specifically authorize or request it. And even then, sometimes I'll say, no, thank you. So that's one way. Then the statement about mediation is different than court. Mediation was given special legal protections. And so it's trying to make of this a safer place for you to say what you think needs to be said without worry that it'll come back at you later on. That's an information description. Then regarding questions, it's lovely if you're using this filter, you get to catch and drop all those questions that have to do with your theory about what would be better. And just ask the questions which are your genuine curiosities. I often start with, there's something that is puzzling me. I wonder if you would be willing to help me out. So that's a preface to, here's what's puzzling me. And that's an invitation. They don't have to take it. So those are a couple of quick examples of how I might use it in a mediation context. And I see this other question about what could you ask the person in mediation who repeats themselves and not allows the mediator to speak. Even many attempts to ask to speak. Interrupting is a lovely skill. And an interruption is, in a way, a claim of your power in the room as the moderator for the mediated conversation. So that's how I always approached it. I need to interrupt you here for just a moment. There's something that's come up. And then I wait. And once I have that quiet, then where I'm going to go is, I have heard several times something that seems the same. I want to check and make sure you're not trying to tell me more than one different thing here. Will it be okay if I identify that? Good. Okay, so here's the thing you said, and then I go on like that. So that's one of the ways I like to handle that. But I do actually lean in a little on my role to make the room orderly.
Analea, I see you, and also again, somebody instead of putting their question to everyone, they're just doing it directly to me, so only I can see that. Evan is asking to make a person being questioned feel comfortable and not on auto defense. What is the best intro to obtain information in an investigation? Not sure what kind of investigation this is, but that's the question. To make a person being questioned feel comfortable and not on auto defense, what is the best intro to obtain information in an investigation?
Well, I wish I had that before I wrote the talk. In there, first of all, you have the word investigation, which is one of the ones I identified as I would rather not be the person being investigated, right? Because I feel at risk just by virtue of the word that's used. So, and Julie, your question about, well, what is the investigation that's going on? So all of that context missing here, this question is a good opportunity to look at how do you ask a question where you are not trying to shape a behavior, but trying to get information that you have a need for. Now, one of the needs you expressed is the need to make them comfortable enough to lower their defenses enough to be in the room with you. I would say, first acknowledge, I can easily understand how it feels really risky to be here today. And I want to acknowledge that at the start. And I want you to tell me if anything that I say or do makes that worse. I will do everything I know to make that better. And sometimes I will need your help. That would be an example, again, of me sharing my goal, predicting what I will do so that I am easy to track and understand when I do other things.
Okay, now we have Analea. Oh, you're muted.
Yes, thank you, Paul. I really appreciated this. Sometimes, actually, I like it at the end of a mediation when both parties begin to talk to each other. I feel like they're going to have to do that when they get out of the room, so it's good. But now suppose we hear one person asking a question or why don't you tell her about a time, 2 months ago, what happened with the kids, and it's like, how would you, that's obviously an attempt to either threaten them or make them feel guilty or get, a reveal. Mm-hmm. How would you handle something like that as a mediator? Like, what would you want? What are you asking here? What do you want to know? Something like that?
Well, yeah, first of all, you have to separate what you're trying to, it sounds like you're trying to guess what they want to find out. So that's something that's better with a direct question. You know, I sense that you have some questions to ask. Please ask them. If it is trying to push information out there that you hope would be useful, then preface it that way. So I would say, I have a couple ideas that I'm inclined to share, but I want to ask your permission first, because generally speaking, it's not my role to give you advice.
Okay.
And then let them choose. So I think the essence of it is, I'm trying to respect your choice, you, the listener, your choice about whether I should share what's on my mind here. And I could even identify what's on my mind as an example, an experience I had with someone else that seems to me to be similar.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Well, we have come towards the end of our time together. It's almost 1 o'clock. And I would really like to thank all of you folks for being here today at your lunch hour. And I also would like to thank our speaker, Paul, for sharing some of his wisdom. I don't know about you, but I'm very curious to read that book now and learn more about these ideas. If you don't mind to please take a few minutes to fill out the short online survey. I've put the link into the chat. You can click in on that. Please check your email. Probably tomorrow, I will send out the handout and the video recording of today's talk. Before we end, Paul, would you like to offer us any parting words?
I do have something there. This is at the end of my bio. It said that these days I give my time to singing and songwriting. So I have a group that I meet with every week. We're supposed to write a new song. And one week we all agreed that we would find a Rumi quote, the poet Rumi, and see if we could write a song based on that. This is the quote that I chose. Set your life on fire, gather the folks who fan your flames. And I did a little research because, one of the things that occurred to me is like this, I don't think this means burn down your building. I think this means, in a Rumi context, and in the material that I'm sharing later, it has a link to a video about this. Rumi was all about the heart. Sharing the heart is what I'm trying to support, what I think this kind of language supports. And your heart is got a light, a flame to it. You need to gather with people who make that burn brighter. And I can tell you that the opportunity to speak to you does that for me. And I hope that it does it for you.
Thank you so much, Paul. Everybody, let's give him a warm Zoom reaction, applause, energy.
Yeah, I did have it.
And thank you so much for being here today. We hope you come and join us next month on the third Thursday. That will be Sandra de la Tour on the topic, The Ladder of Assumptions, a tool for self-reflection and understanding. And I'll put the link in the chat. I will be sending out the video handouts and the survey in an email tomorrow to the person who asked in the chat. Thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yes, thank you.